Good morning, everyone. Welcome to today's illsoyadvisor.com webinar on nitrogen management systems in tile drain fields, brought to you by the Illinois Soybean Checkoff Program. My name is Mark Ingridson with the ISA Communications team, and I'll be moderating the webinar today. Just a couple of housekeeping items. If you included your CCA number when you registered for the webinar, and if you stay with us for the entire presentation, your number will automatically be submitted for 1 CEU in soil and water management. If you're listening to this recording of this webinar, you'll need to go to the Certified Crop Advisor website, log on to your account, and apply for a self-study credit. There will be an opportunity to ask questions during the webinar. Submit your questions in the chat box, question box on the right hand of your browser window. Please keep your questions brief and only to one point. We'll address questions at the end of the presentation. So without further delay, I'd like to introduce Lowell Gentry. Lowell was raised on a farm near Polo, Illinois in Ogle County, and has worked as an agricultural research scientist for more than 30 years at 3 universities, including University of Illinois, University of California, Santa Cruz, and Michigan State University. He received his MS degree from the University of Illinois in the Department of Agronomy under Dr. Fred Velo, concentrating on plant nutrition and soil fertility. For the past 20 years, he's been researching ways to minimize nutrient losses, especially nitrate in tile drainage, using both in-field and end-of-pipe techniques. His presentation will focus on nitrogen management systems in a corn and soybean rotation and provide results of a replicated tile drainage study. Study was funded through Illinois NREC, the Nutrient Research and Education Council, essentially the fertilizer checkoff in Illinois. With that said, I'm going to hand it over to Lowell Gentry. Take it away, Lowell.
All right, thanks, Mark. It's great to be with you today. I really appreciate this opportunity to share these results with this group. So the title is taken right from one of our proposals. It's an NREC proposal, and we're trying to increase the efficiency of nitrogen use, and if we can get more nitrogen in the crop, maybe we can improve yield, have less N left over, and therefore less N getting into the tile, and maybe we'll have a smaller hypoxic zone. So it's the rare triple win if all that works. So I've been looking at ways of trying to tighten the nitrogen cycle and keep nitrogen for the crops. So in this first picture here, this is a participating farmer. He participates in some of our research. It's Eric Miller putting some fall N on for us, and here's an N rate study on his one of his fields. Eric has allowed us to look at a corn, soybean, wheat rotation with cover crops and bioreactors, and I'm going to end with a little bit of data from that study, but I'm mostly going to focus on our replicated tile drainage study. And yes, we have lots of tiles in Illinois, and I'll show you where they are. And then this map here of the Mississippi River Basin shows where we're losing the most N, and it's not surprising that it's in the intensively tile drained areas of Illinois and Iowa and across the Corn Belt. So my talk today, I'm going to show you a long-term river data set of nitrate that we have collected for the past 25 years at the same location, and document a year when very little fall N was used, and show you that the rivers responded quickly to that. As I said, we're going to feature a replicated tile drainage study which looks at the timing of nitrogen application, fall versus spring versus split applications. And then I'm going to end with that study at Eric Miller's where he's got a corn, soybean, wheat rotation where he's double crop soybean the last 2 years. Plus he's got cover crops and bioreactors. I'll touch very briefly on bioreactors at the end. So the impetus behind a lot of this research is the idea that we need to reduce the amount of nitrogen and phosphorus leaving our fields and leaving the state and getting in the Mississippi River and heading to the Gulf of Mexico, where we have this seasonal hypoxic zone that sets itself up every summer and fall. It is only temporary. With high winds and mixing, then it disappears and then reforms each year. But the EPA Science Advisory Board that was put together back in 2008 came up with this target of reducing both nitrogen and phosphorus by 45%. That's the amount of nitrogen that leaves each state, and we have a deadline of 2035 to get to that ultimate target. But we do have an interim date of 2025 where I think we just need to show that we're moving the needle in the right direction. And I think some of the research today will show us how we can do that. We have seen that the hypoxic zone was very large last year. In fact, it was a record size last year. Yet we had great yields, great crop yields. So there is a bit of a disconnect. You would think that we had, with better yields, better nutrient use, but it depends on when it rains and how much, and also the timing of N application is important, and I'll point that out. Now, this past year, it was also predicted to be very large. I mean, this summer, in fact, it was supposed to be one of the largest again, because that's based on the nutrient load in the Mississippi River in May. And so there was a large load again, but the hypoxic zone is much, much smaller than predicted. And they blame that on very strong winds in the Gulf. So their model was unable to predict the size correctly due to the interference of strong winds. But you can see the goal is something that's pretty hard to meet. I guess we get close to it in dry years like 2000 and 2012. But we've got some work to do. And there was a science assessment that each state did, and that in our state that was led by my old boss, Dr. Mark David, who has retired 2 years ago, but his last act was to lead this science assessment, and he found, or this group found, that agriculture, or the non-point sources, contributors, suggest that the 80% of the nitrate is from agriculture and 50% of the phosphorus is from agriculture. So we have a very populated state, so that phosphorus contribution is greater from agriculture in less populated states, because we have 10 million people up in Chicagoland that their sewage effluent goes in the Illinois River. So the point sources can work on the phosphorus and make great strides, but the agricultural sector needs to try and reduce its nitrate load. And we've got an Illinois nutrient loss reduction strategy now, which is a suite of best management practices, and I'm going to go through some of those today. When I think of tile drainage, I think of it as a prerequisite for high yields. We need tile drainage in this state because we're so flat, we would be very poorly drained. So on one hand, we can't do without it, but unfortunately tiles are the major source of nitrate to streams. And riparian buffers in this area have very limited effectiveness, because the nitrate is in the pipe already, and it is shunted past the roots of these riparian buffers. That's why they're looking at saturated riparian buffers, and there's some promise there. Here's a photograph from the 90s when we had a 5-inch rainfall, and just to document or demonstrate how poorly drained our soils are. And so all of this kind of land is tile drained, and now we've moved to pattern drainage. But I think of all this drainage as reducing denitrification, but increasing the leaching potential. Here's a topo map of Illinois, and it nicely shows where the last glaciation has been. I'll move my mouse. Here's the terminal moraine as we go along here, and all of this area has a lot of tile drainage. It needs, it's very flat. It was scoured by the glaciers. Mark mentioned I was from Ogle County. That's up here in this mountainous region of Illinois, near the unglaciated area. I use mountainous quite loosely there. As I said, we are installing tiles in pattern systems now, and this is an example of tiles every 50 feet, 50-foot spacing, and they can make quick work of this today with the machinery. And here's where the tiles are located. Again, this looks quite similar in Illinois as to where the last glaciation was. And in fact, this is the Des Moines lobe of that same glaciation period, and the glaciers went right across here. So wherever the glaciers were, that's where we have the greatest installation of tiles. And it's no surprise that these are the watersheds then that export the most nitrate. And the dark blue is in the range of 15 to 25 pounds of nitrogen per acre per year. And I'm going to show you a watershed that starts starts at the southern edge of Champaign-Urbana, and show you what we find in that watershed. It's the Embarras River, which enters into the Wabash at the Illinois-Indiana border, and then this is a close-up of the upper Embarras River watershed, where we have been sampling the outlet. Here's a larger view of that at a little town called Camargo, Illinois. And its headwaters, like I said, are in Champaign-Urbana, but Urbana and Champaign sewage effluent go into different streams. So we don't have to sort that out. This is a very nice watershed for looking at row crop contributions of nitrate, because there's very few animals in the way of livestock and a little sewage effluent, and it's 90% row crop. The USGS gauges the flow of the river at Camargo. That's why we go to that bridge, and off the bridge we'll lower a rope with a bucket and get a sample down through the water column and back up, and that's the sample we then use to look at nitrate, ammonium, phosphorus, total nitrogen, total phosphorus, and a few other things like silica and chloride. Anyway, we've visited that bridge over 1,475 times in the past 25 years, and we generally sample weekly if there's no event, and as much as daily or more during very large flow events. The long-term data sets are really important because, well, they can establish what is the baseline or baseline of conditions. What is our average loss per year? And also, long-term data sets allow for the quantification of environmental change. For example, if we're getting wetter, we can account for that. Or if we're getting hotter, does that change things? Also, if we have land use or management changes. For example, if someday we use a lot more cover crops or bioreactors, we have a 25-year baseline of what was occurring prior to adoption of those type of techniques. Also, a long-term data set can reveal unusual events or unusual years, and I'm going to point out a couple of them. And ultimately, this data will be used for predictive models. So USGS is the expert on getting flow. They measure discharge in cubic feet per second. And you can see that we've had 3 major events in the last 25 years of over 7,000 cubic feet per second. But you can see it's a very flashy system, and it just depends on when it rains as far as N loss. Look at 2012 here, very, very dry year, very little flow, very little N loss. So we use our 1,475 samples to calculate load. And load is flow times nitrate concentration. And that gives us pounds of nitrate loss per year. And on average, we're losing 3 million pounds per year of nitrate in this small watershed. It's about 119,000 acres total. And just so happens that the average flow is 13 inches per year. Well, now what does inches per year mean for flow? We know the volume of water. USGS, we can sum up the daily flow, and we have a volume. And we know how many acres to spread that volume out on. And if we take the average amount of flow and we spread it out over the entire upper Embarras watershed, it'll be 13 inches deep. And we get about 40 inches of precipitation a year. So in this area, we found that about 1/3 of the precipitation becomes river flow. And let's see, you can see that dry years are down here around 1 million pounds. That's about 8 pounds per acre per year of nitrate loss, where in 2002 and 1993, very wet years, these were near 50 pounds per acre per year N loss. So you can see quite a range. A very good R-squared, so it suggests that a regression of river flow and nitrate load is an R-squared of 0.84, meaning this one line, this equation, can predict with certainty about 84% of the time. And so our average loss from this watershed is 27 pounds of nitrate per acre per year, which is a little higher than what you saw on that other map, but those were larger watersheds. But this is a very intensively farmed and extensively drained watershed. Now here's what all those samples look like. Each one of these dots is an individual bottle of water that we grabbed off of the bridge. And again, you can see that we're often above 10 part per million, which is the drinking water standard. The other thing you see is that we go up every year and then we come back down, up and down. And then this low nitrate period occurs at about the same time every year. It's often September, October, November. Well, that's when river flow is very low. Tiles have stopped flowing, and so there's no contribution of nitrate from the tiles, and nitrate in the river quickly goes to below 1 part per million. Interestingly, in 1993, we did not see that drop all the way below 1 part per million, and that's the only year that occurred, which would have been an outlier. So our impression was wrong. All the next 24 years show that we go to a low value. What was different about 1993? Well, it's the wettest year on record, and tiles never stopped flowing that summer. They flowed all year long, and so nitrate was always found in the creek. But I point out 2 unusual years, and 2013 is the highest flow-weighted mean, and of 11.7, and that's the year that follows the drought. So we have a 50-year drought. We had poor corn yields in Champaign County, and there was a lot of nitrate left over in fields, so that's carryover of nitrate from one year to the next. And we had a very wet January through June of 2013, so it was really a 1-2 punch combination as far as water quality goes, because a bad drought followed by a very wet winter certainly leads to high nitrate loss. And then the other year that stands out is the water year of 2010. And in 2009, farmers were unable to put very much fall in on, if at all. It was a late harvest. It rained a lot right in the start of the application season. We had 1 inch of rain for 3 days in a row, right in the middle of November. So the field conditions were not suitable. Very few people got fall in on, and the rivers responded immediately. And that's the lowest flow weighted mean we've seen over the 25 years. So there's not a long lag time. In these tile drained watersheds, you can get very quick response. So that's the good news. So if we could impart a technique that kept nitrate from getting into our tile lines, we could see that in the next year. It doesn't take decades. Some have suggested that we can't see the good works of conservation because of the lag time. Well, we're not going to have a problem with lag time in these heavily tile drained areas. And so let me point out the 2 points that fall off the line, and it's those 2 years. The 2013 load is 34% above the predicted line here, and 2010, the year without fall end, it's 32% below the line. So this long-term data set allows us to document or demonstrate an outlier of sorts. And then if things were getting better, if conservation efforts were changing things, we would start falling off the line. Our load values would be down in here, and yet 2017 falls right on the line. In fact, that suggests that I wouldn't have needed to sample 50 times, or how many times we sampled in 2017. I could have used the equation based on the 15 inches of flow. I could have predicted that load, but we went through the effort to make sure that that is the case. So I guess that's a little disappointing to say that conservation efforts aren't making any difference yet in this watershed, but I could twist something into a positive here by saying we've added a lot of tile drainage over the last 25 years as well, and it's not getting worse. So maybe conservation efforts are either being offset by conservation efforts are offset by increased tile drainage, or the other thing we could suggest that improved efficiency, meaning we're getting higher yields with the same amount of N applied. You would think that would show up over time, and maybe the tile drainage installations are masking that improvement in efficiency. But nonetheless, 2017 fell right on the line. So let's move on to the project that I want to feature here. As Mark said, it's funded by the Nutrient Research and Education Council, and it has the title of my talk, and it's essentially the 4 R's of nutrient stewardship plus a cover crop treatment. And certainly it takes a group effort to get all these samples collected and analyzed, and here's our U of I crew. We've got an undergraduate that has graduated and continued to work on with us, Michelle Rolfe. We've got Corey Mitchell, who's our lab tech that we may get out in the field when we need hands sampling cover crops. Luis Andino, our grad student, John Green, our field tech. And we've got help here from the Illinois Fertilizer and Chemical Association as well. Dan Schaefer, who is the Director of Nutrient Stewardship for IFCA. He's absolutely invaluable to us. He makes sure that we're keeping on track and getting the treatments on the ground in a timely fashion. And Jason Solberg, who is our drone pilot, and he is a soil sampling phenom. So here's one of our monitoring stations. You can see a whole bunch of them in the background. We use an agri-drain structure to intercept the tile water. Inside here is a V-notched stop log and a pressure transducer. The height of the water over the V weir gives us a flow equation. We can calculate liters per second. We've got an automatic water sampler here. It's sampling 3 times a day, but we pick and choose samples 3 times a day. Allows us to characterize each flow event quite nicely. Here's a close-up of the V-notched weir. Here's the tile coming into the agri-drain structure, and there's the water going over the V, and the pressure transducers in this stilling well right here. This just happens to be the tool that agri-drain gives us to move the stop logs. So the methods briefly, we have 6 nitrogen treatments or nitrogen systems, and there's 3 replicates. Plus we have both phases of the corn and soybean rotation. So we've got 18 tiles monitored from corn and 18 from soybean. So we're looking at 36 monitoring stations on one farm. The tiles are 100 feet apart. So a plot by definition is 50 feet on either side of the 5-inch lateral. They're very long plots. They're about 2,000 feet long. So these are very large plots for a replicated tile drainage study of a little more than 4 acres each. It's a randomized complete block design. And I have to note a couple of caveats is that we were not able, or we weren't in a position to put fall in on in 2014, nor did we establish cover crops in 2014. And the entire field before we took it over for research was in corn. So that makes second year corn in 2015, which requires more N. So 2015 is a setup year, but it also was a chance for us to establish baseline and look at the variability across these 36 tiles. There are guidelines for fall in, and fall in is in 2 of our treatments. And the important thing to note here is that the guidance is that we're to wait until soil temperatures are below 50 degrees Fahrenheit at the 4-inch level and hopefully maintained below that and dropping. Soil moisture is very important. Too wet or too dry leads to losses during application. Takes a little bit of horsepower. You need to get it in at least 6 inches deep, and we use a nitrification inhibitor in the fall. Here's a map of the farm. The red boxes here are the 3 reps in one crop versus 3 reps in another crop. For the blue boxes, there's 6 laterals in each one of these boxes, and the treatments are randomized within. And we're essentially just flipping back and forth on each side of this ditch, corn versus soybean. Here's the 6 treatments. We have a full rate of anhydrous ammonium with an inhibitor in the fall. Our full rate is 160 pounds of nitrogen per acre, but in the first year we did have to use 200. You'll see that on one of the graphs. Our second treatment is a three-way split. Half of the nitrogen in the fall with an inhibitor. Then we come in with 25% at planting and 25% side dress as UAN. Then our third treatment is a full rate of anhydrous in early spring without inhibitor. Then we have one rate that's reduced, or one treatment is reduced. It's a 75% rate. Again, all of it applied in the spring. This makes sure we're not over applying nitrogen. This treatment should lead to a yield loss each year, and it does. And then 5 and 6 are both a split application between spring and side dress, and an equal split. But treatment 6, we add cover crop, and that would be oat and radish into standing soybean ahead of corn, and cereal rye after corn ahead of soybean. So here's an example of the outline of one of our large plots here, because you can see the cereal rye last spring, and this was in April when we got a large rain event, and you can see why this field needs tile drainage. And that was a period of high N loss, and then the field looked like this again in May. So the first year we're following corn, all 36 plots were handled the same. So until we put spring nitrogen on in 2015, we consider this 4 months of looking at the variability of all 36 tiles. We did split them 18 tiles here and 18 here. Each dot is the average of the 3 replicates. And what we wanted to see was what kind of overall variability do we have, and it's not too bad. There was a couple of plots that were losing higher N, and that has sorted itself out over time. But importantly here, the 2 groups were losing about the same amount of N for that baseline period. And then now adding to that baseline, we've added spring N here and side dress N here, and sure enough, when we get a rain event, we did see nitrate concentration in the tile spike upward, and it did cause a little increase in loss versus just over soybean, where soybean was not fertilized, and but still quite similar and under 20 pounds per acre. So let's look at crop yields first, because we're trying to maximize yield. We're looking for high yield environment, and this is an example of our yield row. That's 2 passes with a 4-row combine. At the far end of this, you can see our automatic water sampler, and we're looking at about a 2,000-foot view of the yield row there. So in our setup year, we did not have the full complement of treatments. The 2 treatments that would have gotten nitrogen in the fall became all in the spring, so it gave us 9 reps of that. So we had 9 reps in this, and then 3 reps and 3 reps. Of course, remember it's a higher N rate in the first year because of second-year corn, but nonetheless, the 75% rate did cost us 20 bushels of corn, and there's no difference between all in the spring or split application that year. Soybean, no treatment effect, and averaged at about 53 bushel per acre across the plots. So here's the corn grain yield in 2016, and now we've got the full suite of treatments here, and you can see that the reduced rate cost us about 20 bushels again, and it was significantly lower than the other treatments. But interestingly here, it doesn't matter if we split applied, did a 3-way split, put it all in the fall, put it all in the spring, it didn't matter. We got the same corn yield. So, but I'll show you what the tile nitrate loss from these plots are after I go through the corn and soybean yields. Here's the soybean grain yield in 2016. This is the best soybean yield I've ever personally seen. There were a lot of 4-bean pods, very impressive. We have fewer treatments because, again, we're going back to what were the N treatments in 2015, and so there's 9 reps in here. But what was important to show here is that there was no lasting effect of not using enough N the year before, and the cover crop didn't cost us any yield, and that would have been cereal rye planted ahead of soybean. And so we've got 80 bushel per acre across the board here. 2017, we had a little more variability, and I wouldn't have needed to show the statistical letters here because they're all the same, but just to demonstrate that we did perform statistics on this. We had some green snap and it's just made some noisy data. I think clearly there's a trend here this time where we certainly have again lost maybe 20 bushel per acre with the reduced rate, but the trend that we may have lost some yield with fall in and even spring in, and where this year the split applications were better. Unfortunately, not significantly different. But the 2017 soybean grain yield was very significantly different, if I can say it that way. We detected significant differences, and here I'm lamenting the fact I can't get corn differences, and yet we see a difference with the soybean grain yield, and I really don't know why this is. I'm going to pass by you a speculative conclusion of what may be going on here, but first bit of news is that it looks like the cereal rye did hurt yields, and it went back to the stand. 2 of the 3 reps had a bit of a thin stand. So as it turns out, when we planted our soybean in 2017, all treatments, the soil conditions were perfect in all treatments except for cereal rye. It was still a little wet. We probably should have waited a couple of days. That's the difficulty of trying to pull off everything on the same day. And so it hurt our stand a little, and that hurt our yield. But to think that we've got these significant differences for these other nitrogen treatments, and these are nitrogen treatments from the year before, because there's no nitrogen going on soybean. So the two plots with fall N have the highest yield. And I'll touch on that later. That's very surprising. And I don't know if this is a false positive, but this is significant at below the 5% level. Therefore, I suppose it could be a false positive. We have a 1 in 20 chance of that, but we did get significant differences. So now we're looking at the tile nitrate concentration. You've already seen this part of the soybean corn rotation, and then you've seen this part of the corn soy rotation. So let's go to the second year here, and you can see that the black and red dots, which were the 160 pounds of N in the fall versus half of the nitrogen in the fall with the two-way split, seems the fall N was clearly leakier than not having N on until we applied in the spring. So this separation shows that we were losing more fall N than, losing more N from plots that had fall N applied than those that didn't have any nitrogen applied. It remains fairly flat if there's no nitrogen on until we put the fertilizer on. Now on the other side of this graph, here is the cereal rye effect. Again, this is the average of 3 plots. And the concentration went all the way down to 2 part per million. So just in one field, it's a 280 acre field, but we've got concentrations from some plots over 20 part per million, and then other plots with only 2 part per million. So it's amazing to see this kind of separation between the treatments in the first year. And I think the luck would have it for us, it was a warm winter, which was good for cereal rye growth, but bad for fall N. I do want to point out right here that we did plant oat and radish, and we haven't seen any effect on tile nitrate load from the oat and radish. It just hasn't grown enough for us. Now here's what the cereal rye after corn looked like. This is very good biomass production. And we had this in 2016 and 2017. We had about 35 pounds of nitrogen in that above ground biomass. So we'll have to see what kind of load reduction that produced later in this talk. And there's our oat and radish. Just not getting the establishment we had desired. We're using strip till at this site, and in fact we apply our fall N in strips, and then we make strips on all the plots. But oat and radish hasn't been getting us enough biomass, not accumulating enough N to impact the tile. So we're thinking of switching to something that grows more in the fall. We're thinking about annual ryegrass instead. We're not going to try oat and radish anymore at that site. So now we add the third year of data. You've seen these two, and now here is the next year. And again, you can see here's the cereal rye effect on that light blue dots. The cereal rye planted here, and sure enough, now we're down to about 1 part per million. But all the plots are a little lower than they were, so our trajectory is going down. That's good. But interestingly, the plots that had fall N on continue to have the highest tile nitrate throughout the next growing season. And I was quite surprised by that. Don't know why the half rate is higher than the full rate, but both plots that had fall N continue to lose more. So it seems that we've loaded the shallow groundwater with nitrate, and as soon as the tile starts up again, this is, if there's no dots, there's no tile flow. And as soon as tile flow starts, we're at the highest concentration. And the flip side of that is here's the other rotation. Now this is corn, soybean, corn. You've seen the cereal rye effect. Yes, we planted oat and radish, but I don't think it had any effect. Just didn't grow enough. This is carryover of the beneficial effect from that cereal rye into the next year. And that was also a surprise to me. So here's the counter to the other example. We have depleted the shallow groundwater of nitrate, and when the tile starts flowing again, it's still at that low concentration and stayed low until we put nitrogen on. And now we have fall N on, but we're not seeing that difference that we saw the year before. Why is spring N right up there with the fall N? Well, it turns out that February was an excellent time to do field work in 2017. It was the warmest February on record. And most of the farmers that we saw were applying their spring N in February. I talked to Dan Schaefer. I said, what's everybody doing? He says they're putting it on. I said, well, let's us put it on too, right along with them, so we can have an idea of what's going on in their field. So we got our spring N on, and I put it in quotes, on February 28th. And so really it's more like a late winter application. And I wonder, was this common throughout the Corn Belt? I mean, we can see that the high temperatures were in February, but I don't know if that was common across the Corn Belt to put spring N on that early that year. We did end up with the largest hypoxic zone that year because we had very heavy rains in April and May, and the LSU group that looks at the hypoxic zone predicted a very large hypoxic zone because of that large load that was going down the Mississippi River at the time. So here are our tile loads in pounds per acre. Again, you see A's all across there. This is not significantly different. It's close to being significantly different. We've used a very conservative statistical evaluation here. It's called the Tukey's pairwide comparison, and so it does a better job of eliminating false positives, but it makes it hard to get significant differences. But if we look at the magnitude of difference here, the change here, it's about an increase of 10 pounds per acre with fall N. Now, that's significant to the river load. We're losing 27 pounds per year on average down the Embarras River, and 10 pounds of that would be about 30%. But 10 pounds from off the fertilizer, 160 pounds, that's only about 6%. So we lost an equivalence, a very small amount of N, and it didn't affect corn yields. This is why we don't see people moving away from fall N readily, because it doesn't necessarily affect yield, but there is increased N loss. And then also this is just noise, that the fact that the cover crop is higher here, that was the oat and radish, so there was no benefit from the oat and radish in that example. Now you can see we're starting to see the effect of a lower N rate that came the year before. Well, that's interesting. That's down a little bit. Here we got some significant differences because the tile load was reduced by 40% by the cereal rye, and that was enough to give us a significant difference. And so, in our very first year of trying cereal rye, after corn, ahead of soybean, we had an instantaneous response. No long lag time. We're not going to need a decade to see a difference in these tile drained areas. So that's the good news, that we can have a great impact if the cover crop grows well enough. For example, I'm not showing you this year's data, but we have a very, very small, likely not significant, decrease in tile nitrate load because the cereal rye did not grow very much. It's only about a quarter of the biomass that we got in the previous 2 years. So a cold winter was not very good for cereal rye growth. Here's the tile nitrate loads from corn. Here we do have significant differences. Again, the reduced rate is showing that we can reduce tile nitrate loads by using only 75% of the N, but we're reducing yield. That's not what we want. Here we go with the fall N, and the half rate in the fall are the highest, but the spring N is right up there. Well, that's that late winter application. Split application lost less. And now here's the carryover from the fall N to the 2017 year, and not significantly different, but you can see that the load was higher. So let me go back, and here's my wild speculation. Does the fact that there's higher nitrogen in that shallow groundwater left over from the fall end plots somehow help the soybean in a year that was a real challenge for the soybean crop? We had a dry grain fill. In fact, our seed size was about 25% less in 2017 than it was in 2016. That's why we only got 50 some bushels per acre versus the 80 bushels the year before. So could capillary action during dry period bring nitrate laden water up to the roots of soybean? I don't know. I'm only telling you guys this. I'm not going public yet. No, I'm just kidding. I just think it's a remarkable finding, and if that's the case, we'll have to watch for that in years to come. Now, I put the whole story together here, the cumulative tile load for the past 2 years of the 6 nitrogen systems. You can see the full rate in the fall is losing the most. That's about 54 pounds per acre over the 2 years, so divide it by 2, and we're losing 27 pounds per acre per year. Where the system that lost the least, about 31 pounds or 15 pounds per acre per year, was the treatment that had the split application, spring and side dress, with the cover crop, and it's the cereal rye effect that got us down here. So a very nice separation in just 2 years' time of those 6 treatments. And overall, it's a 43% decrease if we moved from all nitrogen applied in the fall to a 50-50 split with cover crop. I want to point out right here, I think this is really interesting, that the 120 pound rate, or the 75% rate, lost the same amount of N if we split applied the full rate, but yet the reduced rate cost us yield. So it's just not as simple as when people say the problem with nitrate loss is that we're over applying. And you can see here that if we reduce the rate, sure, we can cut down loss, but we lose yield. So there is a balance in there. So the summary of this first experiment: corn yields may be similar with fall in application, however, more tile nitrate is lost. Therefore, I think we have lower efficiency. Soybean yield was not affected by the cover crop in a good year, well, in a great year, which was 2016 when we got 80 bushels per acre. However, stand reduction led to decrease in yield in 2017, in a more challenging year, where we needed one more rain during grain fill, and we didn't get it. Probably the most important finding we have here is that cereal rye after corn reduced tile nitrate load by more than 40%, and that happened right away, no long lag time. And as I just said, reducing fertilization rate decreased tile load, but it also decreased crop yield. Whereas the split application then decreased tile load, but did not reduce crop yield. And I often hear other scientists say that it's all about excess fertilizer. And I don't think it is, because we're still losing N when we reduce the rate, and that wasn't excess fertilizer because we lost yield. This all suggests to me that timing of N application is very important. So let me briefly go over the study here with our cooperator Eric Miller, where he's using a longer rotation with cover crops and bioreactors. So this was the idea of combining nutrient loss reduction strategies all on one farm. And Eric had just put in tile system and had 3 main outlets. So he allowed me to divide his field up in these odd shapes. Not everyone would want to farm like this, but he generously allowed us to do this kind of research. And so what it does is it allows us to have each phase of the 3-year rotation out there each year. So 2015 we had corn, soy, wheat, and then it was soy, wheat, corn. And then in 2017, he tried double crop soybean after wheat. And I'll show you the results of that. But each one of these tiles then enter into a bioreactor, and then he tiled the other side of the field, and then we installed a corn-soy conventional control to be looking at corn yields in a 2-year rotation and tile nitrate loss versus corn in a 3-year rotation. And we have bioreactors on the other side. So we've got 6 bioreactors on this one farm that we're monitoring. We've got 3 years of data. I think it's probably the highest concentration of bioreactors anywhere. So his methods briefly, as I said, we've got each phase of the rotation out there. It's cereal rye after corn. Winter wheat works like a cover crop. It occupies that same space in the rotation, and it is harvested. And then he's got double crop soybean out there after the wheat. And he strip-till corn, no-till soybean, no-till wheat. He's got a little bit of starter on his corn, 180-pound total rate, and this is what he's putting on his wheat. So I took just the one field that had the same starting point as we did in the other study, the replicated tile study, where we had corn in 2015 and we followed it with cereal rye. And as I said, that was a warm winter, so cereal rye grew well on his farm, and we got the same kind of results. Dropped it all the way to 1 part per million. Just amazing how quickly this can work. And then he's got 75 bushel per acre soybean in 2016. So soybean did well. And then he comes in with wheat. And the interesting thing about wheat in rotation is it shuts off the tile flow much earlier than in the corn and soybean plots. Because if you think about it, wheat is bolting when corn and soybean are being planted. So there's a demand for water. I've seen as much as 1 inch rainfall, and we might be getting 25, 30 liters per second out of a cornfield or a soybean field, and there's no water coming from the wheat field. It was all used. So that's another way to reduce tile nitrate load, shut the tile off. So wheat does that. You got a great wheat yield in 2017, and then just outstanding double crop soybean. You got 55 bushel per acre. So this year we're looking at what his corn yield will be. He's at the dent phase already, had a quick year here, and hopefully he's up here around 250 again, and we're going to do an economic analysis of all this come this fall. But he didn't lose very much and after that wheat and double crop soybean. So I'm very optimistic that we can make great strides on reducing tile nitrate loss. And we don't have to go to corn, soybean, wheat. We can just put cereal rye after corn. But if you do have wheat in the rotation, it really can reduce tile flow and tile nitrate loss. And then if you're far enough south and get the right winter and spring and summer to get double crop soybean in there, then maybe you can pull off something like he did here in Piatt County, but that is pretty far south. He's pretty excited about that. He's got double crop soybean again this year. So what have we found? We see that tile nitrate loads can be greatly reduced with a longer rotation and cover crops. And double crop soybean is planted. This is what Eric has come up. If he can get his wheat harvested and the double crop soybean planted by July 1. And he pulled it off. I think he planted the last day in June. And it didn't look that good at first because it was a cold spring and the wheat was behind, but then we had all that high temperature and wheat got ready in a hurry, so he went ahead with his double crop soybean. He's getting benefit from these late rains. Now, if he hadn't been able to plant the double crop soybean, we were going to try a cover crop, as we did in the first 2 years of this study. And we tried radish and turnip, which dropped the tile nitrate to about 1/2 part per million for 4 months, but then over tightened the nitrogen cycle, and it caused us to use more nitrogen on corn, because we then have corn N-rate studies on both sides of the ditch. So we'll have a corn N-rate study in the 3-year rotation and a corn N-rate study in the 2-year rotation. That's how we can assess if the systems are causing us any problems or providing us benefit. So overall, this study provides proof of concept that tile nitrate can be nearly eliminated when we combine these nutrient loss reduction strategies that are outlined in our Illinois strategy. And what we've done is we've combined cover crops and bioreactor. Now in this study, the bioreactors don't have that much to do because the cover crops and the rotation are doing such a good job that in fact we're starting to reduce sulfate, and you can smell hydrogen sulfide, and that's not what we're after. But in the first year, we did see that about 3 to 5 pounds per acre were reduction with the bioreactors. And that was a good year. It was warm. And there is such a thing as a new wood chip effect. And so the first year performance seems to be better than the second and third year. That's what we have found. But nonetheless, they do help. They do remove some tile nitrate, and when combined with cover crops and this longer rotation, we can dramatically reduce tile loss. And so it makes me quite hopeful for the future that we can move the needle before we get to that 2025 interim date where we need to reduce nitrate leaving the state by about 15%. So I leave you with this thought, and we're having these intense rainfall events, and they're happening more in the late winter and the spring. And this is an example back in 2013 when we got 5 inches of rain. And fortunately, this nitrate was still safe. It was, and hydrous ammonia still sitting in the tank. And that was not washed away. But had it already been applied, probably would be some loss. So waiting until closer to when the crop needs it is clearly advantageous when trying to reduce tile nitrate loss. So I thank you for your attention. Again, our sponsors are NREC. We also have a grant from FFAR, and that's to look at more plant analysis at our replicated tile drainage study. We're also adding potassium measurements out there. We're going to look at NPNK in the tile. And we have some USDA money to look at phosphorus as well in tiles. And that's all I have. I welcome questions. I was just going to put this up here to show you some of our publications on some of the end of pipe work, as well as that year where very little fall end was put on, and we published that in a paper as well. So again, thank you, and I will take questions.
Great, thanks, Lowell. Excellent information. We do have a couple of questions that came in both prior to the webinar as well as a few questions that came in during the webinar. So we have a couple of minutes left. We'll try to breeze through these as quickly as possible. The first question I think you probably addressed, but what are your thoughts on fall versus spring nitrogen, and do cover crops reduce nitrogen loss in tile drain fields?
Yes, those are very fitting questions. And well, now that you've heard the webinar, probably everyone can answer that. Fall is clearly leakier. It wasn't, I can't wait to see what the loads are. Tile flow just stopped a couple weeks ago, so we don't have the loads from this past winter. But just looking at the concentrations in the tile, we're not going to see a big difference between fall and spring because it was such a cold winter. And the cover crop didn't do very well for us this year. So I think of 2016 is probably a best case scenario for cereal rye and a worst case scenario for fall end. So as a researcher, we're pretty lucky to start out with something that separated our treatments. Had we started out with this past year, we wouldn't see much difference. And I appreciate the fact that we were able to get that lucky warm winter for us, at least, from a research standpoint. And so my thoughts are worst case scenario, fall end could lead to as much as 30% of our river loads in a year like that. But cereal rye after corn, we've seen that on 2 farms now, decreased tile load by more than 40%. And at Purdue, Shalimar Armstrong, he also has similar studies funded by NREC, and he's seeing 40 to 60% reduction with cereal rye after corn. So I'm quite optimistic, but I know that cereal rye or cover crops in general add to the risk of production, and it adds to the cost. That's why we're really looking forward to doing this economic analysis on Eric Miller's farm with the 2-year control versus the 3-year rotation.
Yeah, absolutely. Lowell, we've got somebody asking if you can go back to the summary slide. There were a couple of people trying to jot down a couple of notes off that, if you could, please.
Sure. That's the first summary, or no, that's the second summary. And that's, yep. That's probably fairly self-explanatory. I wanted to just say that at least at this latitude, the farmer's own instinct was that he couldn't wait past July 1st to start to plant his double crop soybean, and then we would have gone back to a cover crop. So I'll go to the other summary, which is quite a ways. Oh, there it is, not too bad. There, I'll just leave that up there.
Perfect. There's another question here in terms of the cover crops. I believe you said those were aerially seeded, specifically with the radish and the oats not having really good luck. There's a question if there's an option to do a direct seed so you get better seed to soil contact.
Yeah, we did that. Yeah, in year 3. Yep. So the first 2 years, well, the first year we flew it on, then we tried a Hagie high clearance machine, drop them on the soil, and then it's really all about soil moisture. If there isn't moisture there, it's not worth flying them on or paying for a Hagie. And so in that 3rd year, we drilled. But harvest came in the beginning of October, so that's just not enough time to get oat and radish biomass accumulation to the point where we're going to take enough soil N out of the soil to reduce the tile nitrate load. So we tried both ways, and I'm ready to try something different. I'm a little disappointed. See, the reason we go into oat and radish first is that people that are a little worried about trying cover crop might want to sort of have a baby step into the cover cropping world, and we thought something that winter killed would be a good place to start. But if it doesn't have the benefit that we want, I'm ready to move on and try something that overwinters in front of corn, and hopefully that won't interfere with corn production.
Sure. On the replicated trials, Lowell, what was the tillage practice again?
We are doing strip till. So the first 2 years, we strip tilled our corn, and those strips were made in the fall, and we no-tilled soybean. But this past year, Dan Schaefer decided that we would try stripping even in front of our soybean. And so we've just noticed no-till soybean gets off to a little bit of a slow start, and they just looked so good this spring in strips. So we're in 30-inch rows this year, and I just can't believe how tall these soybeans are. They're chest high. So I'm thinking maybe 80 bushel per acre again. But I didn't expect to see that twice in 3 years, because that was the biggest yield I'd ever seen. They're so tall. I hope they don't lodge, and I don't know if that's due to the 30-inch row, because that would make each seed pretty close together in the row. But nonetheless, we look like we're going to have a fantastic yield this year. But so it was no-till soybean for the first 2 years, but then we put them in strips this 3rd year. So we can think of lots of just little tweaks that we can do, and we hope to keep this research going. It would be just fabulous to have 6 or 8 years of continuous tile nitrate on the same plots, and just see what we get. That reduced N rate, that 75% rate, how low will that be eventually, and how bad is that going to be for the corn yields? But I sure think it's interesting that most people on the outside looking in say it's all about excess fertilizer, and that's just not, that's too simplistic. it's much more complicated than that.
Great. Another question here. Well, you talked a little bit about the bioreactors on that last farm. Question on how many pounds of N per acre can a wood chip bioreactor remove in a given year, roughly?
I think it's 3 to 5 pounds per acre. The problem is tile water is so cold, and so it's a microbial conversion of nitrate to N2 gas. So what happens is that the wood chips are saturated, and therefore the water goes anaerobic. And the bacteria that would normally be doing very nicely in an aerobic world, once they run out of oxygen, they have to use nitrate for the purpose of using oxygen, and then they convert that to N2 gas. So we take tile temperature as well. So we have these continuous records of tile temperature. And in a really warm winter, we might get to 50 degrees in April, but many years tile water doesn't get to 50 degrees until about mid-May. And that's pretty chilly water for bacteria to be working fast. And so that's a great limitation of the bioreactors. Now, when we get a tile flow event in June, July, or August, they're pretty rare in August, but much more common in June, then the removal rates are quite good. So I like the idea of bioreactors. I wish they worked a little better. One thing that we noticed was that phosphorus export, it was greater from our bioreactor than from the tile, meaning phosphorus is leaking out of the wood chips, and so that's not a good thing. And I'm not sure what we'll do about that. The ag engineers know about it. I've let them know, and I've raised all my concerns with the ag engineers, and I'll wait for them to come up with the next solution. But as far as a simple passive system, they help, but we have about 10 million acres of tile drain land in Illinois. We probably need 100,000 to 200,000 bioreactors. So it's a tall order to think that bioreactors are going to get us to our target reduction. I think cover crops can do the greatest work for us. So I sort of think that we can do better infield than end of pipe. The problem with end of pipe is when you really need these things, they're flooded because the tile outlets are always at the lowest point in the field. And so that's another limitation. But I haven't given up on them, I look forward to compiling what we find with these 6 bioreactors on this one farm. So stay tuned. Right. Yeah. Just a couple more questions here, and we do want to be respectful of people's time and get off as quickly as possible. But there was a question that just came in. What was the reason for the poor oat growth in the fall? Was it related to herbicide, or was it just the timing? That's a good point. We tried to be cognizant of any of those kind of interferences, so I don't think it was herbicide. We took that into consideration. The first 2 years, we may have jumped the gun. We wanted to get the seed out there, and the leaves were turning yellow, so we expect at late R6 growth stage of soybean, the leaves to come off, and they sort of hung on long. And here now our oat and radish is germinating in really dense canopy, and so maybe we could have done better. But then in the 3rd year, when it was too dry to aerially apply or use the Hagee, we waited to drill, and it was just too late by then. So I think it's two-pronged. Maybe we jumped the gun a little bit the first year, and we could have waited and waited. So there's some finesse in this, but after 3 years, and there's only so many years of research, and one of the last talks I gave. I gave the talk 4 times to 4 different groups on the same day, and 3 of the 4 groups asked, well, if oat and radish isn't working, why do you keep using it? And that was a very good question. I took that to heart, so we're going to try something different. I already spoke with the NREC group, and they're allowing us to make that change. So I think we'll try annual ryegrass and radish, and because that overwinters, but I've also found that grows so much more in the fall than in the spring, and that might be the kind of thing we need in front of corn. Cereal rye, for example, last year we have different termination dates in a different study, and cereal rye doubled in biomass in 11 days. So that makes it a little scary to have cereal rye in front of corn.
Right. Last question here is kind of a technical question, and it goes back to some of the data slide sets that you had early on. Someone noticed that you had a wide range of yields with no significant difference between the A/B, but the significance was set to 0.05. Would you have found greater differences if you set that ratio to 0.1?
Unfortunately, believe it or not, it was 0.11, believe it or not. Yeah, so we just missed significant differences. I have one hope that I can still thoroughly look at this data. We had wind, and so depending on which way the combine was going, we picked up corn better in one direction than another. And I can sort, I'm going to have to go back and look at a yield monitor and see if I can see a direction of the combine difference in yield, because there was a good part of the field that we had green break or green snap and then just leaning corn. And I think just the noisiness of that reduced our ability to detect significant differences. So I'm not done looking at that. It was the probability was at the 0.11, so I couldn't even give it the 10% rule. So I try to err on the conservative side, but I appreciate that question because I almost put P less than 0.11. I think it was 0.114, but I didn't put that in there. I thought that would be a shameless tack to try and force significance, but that's what we got. So I appreciate that question. It was almost significant. You would sure think it was. It was 20 bushels less for the 75% fertilizer rate, but it's just the noisiness of it. That's why people use 4 reps in agricultural studies. And we made this choice. We went with 3 reps and 6 treatments. We would have had to have less treatments. I think we're getting plenty of value. If we continue to do this, significant differences will sort themselves out, and as the treatments separate or the tile nitrate loads separate. But yeah, that was disappointing to see that we didn't quite get a significant difference even with the reduced rate. And we have the same issue with tile loads. Tile flow can be a little noisy. The concentration data is excellent. I didn't show you that the 6 treatments separate very nicely for flow-weighted nitrate concentration. There we have significant differences. So the paper I'm working on will show all of that, and I hope to get that submitted by Christmas, and then we can disseminate this information to the masses. But I sure appreciate this opportunity.
Fabulous. And that's all the questions we had. Again, we thank everyone for attending today's webinar, and thank you, Lowell, for all of this great information. Certainly gives us a lot to think about, as well as look forward to additional research coming out, as you mentioned. And again, just a reminder to everyone, you can find this webinar and other soybean and agronomic resources on the checkoff-funded website, ilsoyadvisor.com. And give us a couple of days to get this one posted, but there are archived webinars as well if you want to delve back into previous topics and self-report for CEU credits. And again, thank you for joining us. Hope you all have a great day, and we'll look forward to seeing you next time.